Hello, everybody. This is a solo podcast. I usually don't do too many solos, but this one in particular because of circumstances that I believe are somewhat unique in Canada and British Columbia and in North America in particular, relate to some of the things that I've done here. I came to Canada exactly 60 years ago from Holland, and the reason that I came to Canada is because we were liberated on April the 12th, 1945 by the Canadian Army. And as a 5-year-old, I was born in 1940, I was so impressed by the Canadians that liberated us that I knew when I grew up I would go to the land of my friends, Canada. And I did in 1965. The other dream that I had is to build a lumber mill, and in particular work on value-added manufacturing, because I was grown up in lumber manufacturing, started training as a furniture maker at a very, very young age. And so when I came here, I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, $25.47, but I had the dream. I couldn't speak the language, didn't have a job, didn't know a soul. So I started here in northern British Columbia, working as a cleanup man in the lumber mill. And this amazing, amazing Canada is an amazing country. It had so many sawmills, and then the first thing that I saw, because I grew up in lumber in Holland, spent some time in Sweden, that the timber here in northern British Columbia is very similar to the timber that we saw and imported from Sweden and other places. Similar quality. What I found amazing, though, is that in the early 60s, late 50s, more than 75% of the tree would go either be left in the bush or go up the burner conveyor. I couldn't believe it. And so I felt I had to do something about it, build a mill of my own. So it took me until 1975 when I started a company, Brink Forest Products Ltd. On October the 1st, 1975, here in the Prince George region, I started a lumber manufacturing mill focusing mainly on value-added manufacturing. I didn't have enough money to buy timber or acquire timber, so I would buy lower quality lumber and upgrade it into higher grades. And then I introduced also something that I had seen in Europe is finger jointing, gluing the pieces together. That became quite successful, and I've had that company now in 2025 for 50 years, celebrating October the 1st, 1975 till 2025, 50 years. We've gone through all the ups and downs. Some was more difficult, gradually grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And then now have an operation here in Prince George, one in Vanderhoof, about an hour's drive away west of us, and then another 2 hours further in Houston. So we have 3 operations altogether, employing normally about 400 people. It became more difficult in the 80s when the Americans that buy most of the lumber manufactured here in British Columbia into their market, and they're selling lumber in the United States had a lot of pressure from US producers to apply duties. And first, relatively minor, mainly aimed at primary producers, meaning the ones that had logs as input. We didn't. We had lumber as input, so we only paid duties on the input material, not on the export. Still, until 2000, and then from there on in, particularly 2016 and 2017, the governments here ignored the fact that value-added manufacturers had a special duty that only paid on the inputs, not on the output, where that issue was ignored, and we then had to pay duty on all the output lumber. Give you an example. If the input cost would be $100 and you added $900 in value added, then be $1,000, rather than paying $15 in duties, it was $1,500. You had to pay $150. You had to pay then. So it became increasingly more difficult. I believe in that with the amazing timber that we have here, we can create more value-added manufacturing, furniture, and all kinds of other products for other markets. But the focus has usually been on dimension lumber. It was not until with the Trump government that came in now, first in 2018, and then in obviously about 8 months ago, in 2025, the second term, where duties were applied to a lot of products and tariffs. There were already existing duties, but they were pushed up much higher and higher. And so where today, a lot of the secondary manufacturing companies in the province of British Columbia, where there used to be in 2000 as many as 200 companies, or 200 different companies in the different regions, totally 800 in the province, they are now probably only 25% of them left, less than 200. And a lot of them now, when the duty again was increased from 14.5% to 35% to as high as 45%, that has affected us now, that most of the secondary manufacturing companies have disappeared. Partially because of forced policy, as it applies to British Columbia and the rest of Canada, but particular about exporting to the United States. So let's talk about the United States, and at the risk of being somewhat political about it, is that I do not understand that obviously CUSMA, the relationship established in 2018 between Canada, the US, and Mexico worked well, and they are complementing each other. The United States has obviously a huge, people that live there, 350 million somehow. Canada and Mexico are large. Canada has about 40 million people living here, but also doing a lot of value-added manufacturing, but also have a lot of resources. In particular, the United States relies on Canada for electricity in eastern Canada, in particular in the eastern United States. They rely on Canada for oil. Up to 40, 50, 60% of their oil comes from Canada. They rely on us for pipelines and many others, for steel and aluminum, as well as lumber, in my opinion. So the United States, in normal circumstances, requires 20 to 30% of lumber manufactured outside of the United States, when all the industry in the United States is at a normal rate of producing about 1.5 million single houses, and it's usually based on the 1.5 million is individual housing units or freestanding ones. And housing starts now are down to about half that, about 750,000. And so mortgage rates are high, but once the mortgage rates will come down further, likely now in the next quarter or two, then and the demand for housing goes up in the United States, they will need lumber from Canada up between 30 and 40% of the lumber requirement. speculation that they have enough timber of their own. They simply don't. Looking at their lumber that they manufacture in the United States, especially in the U.S. Southeast, is that southern yellow pine compared to spruce pine, balsam fir that we manufacture here is, apples and oranges, I call it, or lemons is more appropriate, because southern yellow pine, extremely difficult to work with. You have to drill it before you nail it. So comparing spruce and lodgepole pine to the southern yellow cedar, so the southern yellow pine is like apples and lemons, in my opinion. So they will need, in the future, they will need between 30 and 25 to 30% of Canadian lumber or from another source. I wouldn't know from where, but it only makes sense, and that's the whole point, that Canada, the United States, and Mexico, having different resources working together, it's much more beneficial to the Americans, our friends in the United States, and ourselves, having close relationships even for the future. Today, when I'm podcasting this podcast today, and where tomorrow there will be a meeting between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, in Washington, about, in particular, speaking about tariffs and potentially duties on softwood lumber. I'm not sure what will happen. Certain numbers of concessions have been made by the Canadians to the Americans, in my mind, and that where we now have severe pressure on with duties as well as tariffs, that some of the issues in particular that are likely being talked about is steel and aluminum, affecting Eastern Canada in particular, and lumber, and obviously car manufacturing. I believe one of the issues that should get equal attention is that the softwood lumber duties, not tariffs, that have been applied are unreasonable, not consistent with agreements that we have and should have, and certainly not beneficial for the American building construction as they go forward. They will not have enough lumber to manufacture their houses when it is to the normal level. So I believe now is the time to deal with the issues on unfair duties that have been applied since the early 80s and certainly are not applicable today. There is simply a shortage of lumber required for the U.S. market. Canada is the obvious candidate, but we should do the same with all the others. There should be no tariffs, no duties in any case between the CUSMA countries, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And I would hope tomorrow that Canada will stand up and speak out, because the U.S. needs our electricity, they need our oil, they need the pipelines, they need steel, they need aluminum, and they need our lumber and our timber. So that is the one point that I want to make, because that will be tomorrow. The other point, that since I'm on the topic and it's so critically affecting even our company that's been in place for 50 years, in the last week had 400 employees. Now we're down to less than 100, and we really don't know if we will be in business in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months or the next year. Although we want to be, a lot of companies have not been. Obviously, BC has a number of other issues and other problems, and the reality in BC is that, unfortunately, with the current government, and at the risk of being political, but we may as well speak out, is that BC has an NDP government, a left of center government, that has, for the last 10 years, dominated our policies, obviously, and particularly as it relates to attracting capital and entrepreneurship, it has not been successful. We have deficits. The last deficits, I believe, approached close to $12 billion. When this government came into power, there was a $5 billion surplus. Now, the forecast for next year is $12.5 billion surplus. And, a $12.5 billion deficit. So more of forest companies are shutting down, capital is leaving, entrepreneurship is discouraged, and all throughout the province we have major issues. And maybe the time has come that we should look at an opposition party. The NDP government is a minority government. And maybe the time has come for the people to stand up and saying, okay, 10 years is long enough. So let's go to slightly the right of center. John Rustad nearly was elected with the Conservatives. I would even go further than that. I would go as far as to say that I would like to see, looking at duties, tariffs, and all the other things that are happening to us here in Canada, but also in particular in Western Canada, between Alberta and BC, that Alberta has a conservative government that has been very progressive, have done very, very well in terms of their forest industry, have done well in terms of attracting capital and entrepreneurship. I believe that the two provinces, Alberta and BC, should work closely together in an alliance of working together in terms of economic alliance of Alberta, BC, a structural alliance in economic industries that help both provinces. I can see them working together in the area of oil, pipelines, forest industry, where we can be much more effective and efficient working as two provinces together, not separating from Canada, but working together in a special structural an alliance in those areas, working closely together. I would call it the ABC coalition, structural coalition on economic issues relating to those particular issues in particular. And that can go much further than it would work with pipelines, it would work with oil, it would work with gas, it would also work with the forest industry, which are so similar in the two provinces. I believe that would help both provinces. And I believe that's where the focus should be, not with all due respect to the Premier Smith in Alberta, of separating. I believe much better would be is to align the political objective of both provinces, BC and Alberta, into ABC structural alliance in particular key industries, as I have already indicated. That would be oil, gas, and electrical, and a number of other things, including the forest industry. It would be more cost efficient. It would give us more power working with the U.S. government in terms of they relying on our water, they're relying on our oil, they're relying on our electricity and a lot of the other resources. It would give us a stronger presence inside of Canada, where the focus is usually on Eastern Canada. This would, I believe, create a much stronger Western Canada. And it would send a message to the Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, that if he is in negotiations with the President of Trump in the United States, that the West, we will not take it any longer. We must become joined, much stronger. And I would call it the ABC coalition, strategic coalition that can work closely together inside of Canada and under the umbrella of Canada. It maybe then gives inspiration to the states in the United States where California, Oregon, and Washington can work much closer together between them as well, and then hopefully work closer together with the western part of Canada as well. So those are some of the ideas that in frustration, I've been looking at this for 50, 60 years, and there we have this amazing Canada, country, Canada, and the provinces, Alberta and BC in particular, and with the markets all around us, and saying we must do more things that we are doing together more efficiently, reduce our cost, work closer together as two provinces in terms of pipelines, First Nations, and the forest industry, but also in terms of gas and transportation guidelines, thinking about railroads and road systems and all of that. Can you imagine how powerful we would be together, Alberta and BC, as ABC coalition, structural coalition, in terms of where do we go from here, and building an economic infrastructure that would be immensely powerful in North America. So those are some of my ideas that in frustration, I normally don't do this, but I feel I have to speak up. Thank you for listening.